Hello, friends. I want to talk about an interesting theory I had regarding the Horus Heresy. An interstellar civil war where the largest empire the galaxy had ever known tore itself apart from the inside. Half the Primarchs, the great generals of the Imperium's Holy Crusade, turned traitor after being corrupted by chaos. The other half, those Primarchs who stayed loyal to their father's vision of a unified humanity, desperately fought across the entire galaxy to preserve the Imperium they had created. And in typical Warhammer fashion, neither side really wins, as both forces were left so crippled by the affair that neither were able to persist in the form they were in when they started the war. But, you see, I just told a bit of a fib.
I lied.
It wasn't half the Primarchs who were corrupted by chaos, at least not at the war's outset. Yes, eventually all of the traitor Primarchs would become demon princes in league with the ruinous powers, but really only 2 of the 9 started the war as worshippers of chaos. So, was the Horus Heresy simply inevitable? Would the galaxy have still burned, even without the intervention of the Dark Gods? I think yes. And to explain that, we need to answer a supposedly simple question. Why do civil wars happen in the first place?
Oh, way down south in the land of traitors, rattlesnakes and alligators. Right away, come away, right away, come away.
Civil wars occur when, in essence, a state goes to war with itself. This can, and very often does, take the form of 2 sides of what was once the same military, fighting itself to either defend the current regime or to force a regime change. But in instances like Japan's Sengoku Jidai period, it's more like the state, in this case the Ashikaga shogunate, has become so dysfunctional that every regional warlord has a roughly equal shot at becoming the new head of state. Civil wars are honestly really fascinating, and they're one of my favorite parts of history to explore because they can and do look like basically anything. But that answers what a civil war is. It has nothing to do with why they happen. There are, in fact, many reasons why civil wars happen, and in truth, people have been trying to answer this question for as long as there have been civils to have wars in. However, none of that matters. I'm right and they're all wrong, and we're gonna explain it real simply. The underlying reason why all civil wars happen is because of contradicting class interests. That is to say, one group of people wants one thing, and another group of people want a different thing, and circumstances are such that one group getting their thing requires the other group to lose theirs.
It's Hegelian dialectics, not personal animosity.
Now, critically, this is not to say that all civil wars are uprisings of lower classes to topple higher ones. There's often, like in the case of the American Civil War, a conflict between 2 roughly equally wealthy economic classes. Northern industrialists and Southern slave owners both represented economic interests that dominated the politics of those local regions, and the Civil War occurred when it looked like Northern industry was going to start growing at the expense of Southern slave plantations.
John Brown's body lies moldering in the grave. John
really don't
Brown's
have to give us
body
a
lies
performance,
moldering
Billy
in
Yank.
the grave. John Brown's body lies moldering
I
in the
must
grave,
insist.
but his
Stop
soul
with that
goes
damn
marching
noise.
on. Glory, glory, hallelujah.
Shut up.
Glory,
Stop
glory,
singing. Stop that damn noise.
hallelujah.
Stop.
Glory,
Lord have
glory,
mercy.
hallelujah.
Stop. Shut up.
And his
Shut up.
soul goes marching on.
Similarly, there can be religious civil wars between opposing religions, nationalist civil wars to decide if a colony should stay a colony or become an independent nation. There are as many different kinds of civil wars as there are classes within society. Because of this, to figure out if the Horus Heresy was inevitable, we need to, 1. Describe what the different classes within Great Crusade era Imperial society were. 2. Figure out what those classes' class interests were. And 3. Diagnose if those interests would have come into conflict, specifically the kind of conflict that can only be resolved through violence. So, let's start with the first point. What were the societal classes within the Imperium around the end of the Ulanor Crusade? Well, thankfully we have Dan Abnett's Horus Rising to help us figure this out. This book is an excellent place to look for information on the daily civil administration of the Great Crusade era Imperium, because about the first third of the book takes place on a newly conquered world after all of the fighting is already done. So a lot of the first couple chapters of the book are actually just devoted to exploring daily Imperial life. In Horus Rising, throughout the events of World 6319's compliance, we engage with several different classes of Imperial society. Through the 63rd Expeditionary Fleet, we see the Legiones Astartes and the military dictatorship of the Imperium of Man. Up to this point, the military is a societal class that has functionally ruled the Imperium of Man unopposed, and the election of Horus as War Master can be seen as a further consolidation of power by the military class. The Emperor elected one of his Primarchs to effectively act as his representative on the front line of the Great Crusade. As far as the power structure of the Imperium is concerned, on World 6319, Horus is the Emperor. Or at least, that's what the military arm of the Imperium thinks it means. Through Cinderman and Mercedy Olatin, we see the Imperial intelligentsia, the thinkers and academics that prop up the Imperium's ideology. They're not as important to the literal power plays and politicking, but their job is to give academic and ideological legitimacy to the hegemonic authority within the Imperium. Euphrates Keeler represents the growing underground religious community within the Imperium. Technically, the existence of such a societal class is strictly illegal, but that doesn't actually reduce the potential influence a religious class can have upon a society. And then we have High Administrix Aenid Wrathbone, a real wrench in the military rule of the Imperium. Aenid represents the growing civilian government within the Imperium, the ever-expanding authority and influence held by mortal bureaucrats and politicians. Yes, a civilian government did exist within the Imperium, but before the end of the Ulanor Crusade, it was largely toothless. The Emperor established the Senatorum Imperialis after the end of the Unification Wars, but despite the status of the position, their jobs were relatively low stakes. The inertia of all Imperial society was fully tilted into the Great Crusade. So a group of desk jockeys who voted on tax policy in interior worlds were insignificant in the face of the might of the Great Crusade, pushing the Imperium's frontier ever eastward. That was until the end of the Ulanor Crusade, where the Emperor elected Horus as War Master, but also established a new governing body called the Council of Terra. The Council of Terra's job was to take on a much more hands-on approach to the governing of the various territorial expansions that had been won by the Great Crusade and its expeditionary fleets. Where before it was largely up to the discretion of the Legiones Astartes of what happened to the various worlds they conquered, suddenly there was a group of non-combatant civilian politicians telling them that they don't get to call the shots anymore. Enid arrives into the story and does nothing except make demands of Horus. She has been given the role of exactor, which essentially means she's an incredibly glorified tax collector, demanding that Horus start exerting tithes upon World 6319 even before it's in full compliance. These, to me, represent the four major class divisions within the Imperium by the end of the Great Crusade: the military, the intelligentsia, the clergy, and the civilian government. And of the four, all of them have distinct and contradictory class interests. The Legiones Astartes obviously want to maintain their power over the Imperium. They're the current hegemonic power within the Imperium. They have no intention of giving up that spot. The intelligentsia want to maintain the secular ideological purity of the Imperium and uphold the ideology of the status quo, that being the imperial truth. The clergy, the burgeoning imperial cult, wants to subvert that secularity and replace it with religious veneration of the emperor as a god. They want to replace the imperial truth with the lectitio divinitatis. And the civilian government, the Council of Terra, wants to strip away the total authority of the military over occupied territory and transfer that authority to themselves. So now we know what the different social classes of imperial society are, and we know what each class wants. We now need to answer the golden question. Were these interests in conflict, and would those conflicts require violence to resolve themselves?
We fucking did it, boys! The Forces! The Forces! We did it, lads! We fucking won! Oh, fuck, wait!
The Legiones Astartes feel as though the Council of Terra represents a perversion of the Emperor's vision. He did not merely mean for his sons to be generals, but to be demigod tyrants, ruling over humanity. Where do these baseline humans, who've never even held a las rifle, get off telling us how to administer the lands we've conquered in the Emperor's name? The intelligentsia are in something of a shadow war for the soul of the Imperium against the growing underground religious community within their great secular empire. Orators like Cinderman tend to the ideological purity of the Imperium, making sure the creeping specter of religiosity cannot slither its way back into the hearts of men. The imperial cult is directly contradictory with everything the Imperium stands for, and any good believer, follower, secular observer of the imperial truth could tell you that. The Imperium, circa M31, is far from the unified galactic hegemony it tries to look like. After all, unity is actually quite easy to fake within authoritarian societies. On the contrary, it has divisions deeply rooted into the systems of its society. Were the different class interests within imperial society inevitably going to come into conflict? Obviously, yes. We already see that within the text of Horus Rising. However, does that mean that that conflict was inevitably going to be resolved in the form of a civil war? That's a bit more complicated to answer, but I think the answer is still yes. And the reason why comes down to the Legiones Astartes. It is true that the Space Marines took on many administrative duties throughout the Great Crusade, but it is nevertheless undeniable that in an Imperium without a Great Crusade to fight, the Space Marines would lose their usefulness, and their Primarchs with them. By the end of the Ulanor Crusade, the Legiones Astartes were confronted with the fact that they would be largely obsolete once the Great Crusade was finished. Horus being raised to War Master seemed like a promotion at the time, but really it was a declaration. a declaration that the Space Marines are only a weapon of war, that the greatest among them could not claim a title such as Lord Commander or High Lord, but only that of War Master. They were weapons in the shape of men in a galaxy that was quickly running out of wars to fight. The new spearhead of the Imperium would not be an Astartes gripping a bolter, but a bureaucrat gripping a quill. In the new golden age of the 31st millennium, there would be only paperwork. And this prospect must have been terrifying to Horus.
I have often thought that it might be the Eldar who unseat us. Though fading, they are the most ingenious creatures, and if any could overmaster mankind and break our Imperium apart, it would likely be them. At other times, I have fancied that it would be the Greenskins. No end of numbers and no end of brute strength. But now, friends, I am certain it will be our own tax collectors who will do us in.
The grim reality faced by Horus near the end of the Great Crusade was that he and his Space Marines were quickly being rendered obsolete by the humble bureaucrat. And, well, we all know what happened to the super soldiers that the Space Marines rendered obsolete. Let's say Chaos never corrupts the Lorgar, or Erebus, or Horus, or any of the architects of the Horus Heresy. Let's say the great lie of the Imperial truth remains unexposed. Would that have stopped an interlegionary civil war from breaking out? No, I don't think so. If Chaos never corrupts Horus, here's what I think happens anyway. The power of the Council of Terra continues to expand as the Imperium seeks to consolidate the territory it's won over the Great Crusade. Likewise, the power of Horus and the Legiones Astartes continues to shrink. They become glorified cops and extortionists. The ability of the orcs to form a mob big enough to be a reasonable threat to Imperial garrisons permanently crippled after the Ulanor Crusade. The Necrons still asleep for another 10,000 years. The Tyranids still yet to arrive in the galaxy. And obviously, the threat of chaos practically non-existent. What else is there to do for the Legiones Astartes except for just bullying seditious systems back into compliance? You hardly need Space Marines for that. Horus predicts, perhaps reasonably, that should the Council of Terra fully subsume the administrative responsibilities previously held by the Crusade fleets, that the Legiones Astartes will go the way of the Thunder Warrior. Preferring to die a warrior than be assassinated by the Brotherhood of 10,000, Horus launches a coup, declaring that the Council of Terra is a perversion of the Emperor's vision of humanity, and that he is going to restore the Imperium to its former glory, when the Imperium was led by genetically superior immortal demigods than by the capricious whims of mortal men. I imagine many of his brother Primarchs would take to his side. Angron, Mortarion, Magnus, Perturabo, Kurz, Lorgar, these are all people who have built-in reasons to turn on the Imperium. Their motivation for betrayal would stay pretty consistent. Jagadai Khan and Alfarius are a big question mark. I'm not sure exactly who they'd side with. However, I think 4 Primarchs in particular would switch sides. I think, if the heresy occurred without the intervention of chaos, Guilliman would join Horus to maintain the autonomy of Ultramar. He would find the idea of the Council of Terra ruling over Ultramar so offensive that he would betray the Imperium and fight under the banner of the War Master to make sure that didn't happen. Similarly, I think Fulgrim would stay loyal, because if Chaos never intervenes, then Fulgrim never gets possessed. Finally, I think Corvus Corax and Sanguinius would both also turn traitor. See, Sanguinius always prioritized the longevity of his legion, telling Horus to never tell another soul about the Red Thirst because he feared that the Emperor would do to the Blood Angels what he did to the Second Legion if he found out. With that in mind, I think Sanguinius would react in defense of his legion if he felt they were going to get Thunder Warriored instead, especially given how close Sanguinius and Horus were. Corvus Corax would turn traitor because he was deeply ideologically opposed to the Imperium, but believed the ends of unifying humanity justified the means, and would result in a unified, and critically, freed humanity. He believed that after the Great Crusade, the Imperium would become far more liberatory, even-handed, and egalitarian. Obviously, it didn't, and I think if the timeline of events played out this way, his cognitive dissonance would have eventually broken, and he would have sided with Horus. Which is, I think, the greater point I'm getting at here. Even if Horus never falls to chaos, the contradictions of class interests within the Imperium would fracture, and those fractures would form fissures, and those fissures create sedition, and sedition creates civil war. The Horus Heresy was always inevitable, because tyrants, which Horus was, don't typically take kindly to their power being taken away from them, especially when it's by a group of people that tyrant considers inferior to themselves. And Horus, a genetically engineered weapon of war, would only know one response to such a threat.
From the skies of terror to the galactic rim. Let the seas boil. Let the stars fall. And if I cannot save it from your failure, Father, then let the galaxy burn.
Thank you for watching. Oh my god. Is it over? Am I done? Can I finally go to fucking sleep? It seems like it, yeah. Oh my god. Thanks a ton for watching to the end of the video. This took a long time to make, as you can probably tell by how tired I look, because I have been awake for a very long time. Working on this video. I've been working on this since a bit before the new year, actually. With all that being said, I just want to reiterate, thanks for watching the video. And now, we're gonna do a patron readout. These are the names of all of the people who gave me money to make this video. Angry Skeleton Pope, Gecko551, Jenka, Henry Michelle, Paul Camagliano, Jamie Harris, and Serena J. Fleming. If you want to join those people in giving me money to make these videos, and maybe even getting them out a bit faster than once in a red moon, then consider joining the Patreon in the description below. On top of getting early access and consistent previews to the content I'm making, you also get a special little role in my Discord. You can also join my Discord in the link below. Other than that, please do all the usual YouTube pleasantries if you feel so inclined, and join me next time when we talk about the very fun subject of gender representation in Warhammer 40k. Alright, you have a good one.